Hi everyone, welcome back to SquaredUp Live here at day 2. Welcome to my session today. We're going to be looking at Dashboarding 101, an introduction to dashboards with Dashboard Server. My name is Paul Godwin. I'm one of the customer solutions engineers here at SquaredUp. If you do have any questions along the way, you've got the Q&A section here to ask any questions you have. We've got engineers on the chat to answer any questions as we go along. Got a few bits to cover today, so let's get started. So our session goals today, essentially, we want to master the basics of dashboarding, see how we can connect to any data, and visualize that using our dashboard designer. So some of the topics we're going to be looking at today, first of all, we're going to see what is Dashboard Server. We're going to discuss deploying Dashboard Server as well as Dashboard Server users. We'll look at controlling access to dashboards with our team folders feature. And then we'll look at the integration types. So we'll look at a few of the different integrations that are available. We'll look at where you can add providers such as Web API and dedicated tiles. We'll also look at PowerShell profiles as part of our new PowerShell Tile. Finally, we'll look at actually creating and sharing a dashboard. And that's where we'll spend a bit of time looking at the dashboard designer. We'll then look at the add a few of the different tile types and look at scoping those tiles. And then we'll look at how we can share those dashboards out with open access. So, as I say, what is Dashboard Server? So, it's essentially dashboards for everyone. So, it's a standalone from SCOM and Azure. There are free and enterprise editions of Dashboard Server, and you have our very easy to use and flexible dashboard designer, as you'd be familiar with if you're using our other products, SquaredUp for SCOM or SquaredUp for Azure. And you've got a number of different integrations that you can use within Dashboard Server. Those include tiles such as Web API, the new PowerShell Tile, as well as new dedicated tiles for Elasticsearch and Splunk. There's the ServiceNow Tile. You've got the Azure tiles for log analytics and app insights. You've got our SQL Tile, where you can query Microsoft SQL sources. You've got our image tile and also our web content tile, where you can use that to embed iframes or your own HTML content. Now you'll see there our Splunk and ServiceNow and Azure App Insights tiles. They're part of, they're available in the Enterprise Edition. There's also some other additional Enterprise Edition features that are available. The Enterprise Edition will provide you with the team folders option, as well as the ability to use high availability. You'll get a test license and also access to our great SquaredUp support team. So that's just a little overview on Dashboard Server. But the great thing is, because it's that, hopefully for anyone who's familiar with SquaredUp, if you've used that Dashboard Designer, or maybe you're new to SquaredUp for SCOM and Azure as well as Dashboard Server, you can get something out of this session, because we'll be looking at that designer as well as those integration tiles. That's going to be common across all products. So first of all, a little bit about deploying Dashboard Server. Much like any of the SquaredUp products, it takes just a few minutes to install. You can install that on a Windows server in your environment using a user which is a local admin on that server, ideally a dedicated server if you can. The setup application will automatically install any sort of IIS and any prerequisites that may be required if they're not there already. And as you're going through the deployment, the one thing you can change, you can edit the deployment location settings if you wish to or need to, so such as the website or the pool identity or URL, as you can see from the image on the right there. Now, once installed, you just log on with your admin user, apply your license, and import your sample dashboards, and you're ready to go. Just a few minutes, you've got Dashboard Server up and running. A little bit about Dashboard Server users. There are two types of users. You've got your administrators and you've got your standard users. Now, typically, only a SquaredUp administrator can manage SquaredUp, which includes the following tasks. So creating, editing, and deleting dashboards, except when using team folders, which we'll come on to in a minute. They're the only ones that can create or delete a team folder. And they're also only administrators can add sort of new PowerShell profiles or the integration providers such as Web API, ServiceNow, Elasticsearch, etc. And they're also the only ones that can edit the global navigation structure for the dashboards. Now, adding Dashboard Server users, you don't have to manually add them. You can utilize Active Directory or any of those sort of Windows user groups you already have set up. Just need to make sure that those accounts are in the correct group on the server where SquaredUp Dashboard Server is deployed. So essentially, standard users need to be in the local users group, and the administrators in the local administrators group, or turn to set up, create a SquaredUp administrators group on the SquaredUp dashboard server. And the benefit of doing that is that at least your users then don't have to be local admins on the server as well. It's just a group with those users, and SquaredUp will look into that group to see if the user's there, and we'll give them admin rights over SquaredUp. So I talked about team folders feature. So a great way of controlling access to those dashboards. So as I mentioned, available with the Enterprise Edition, it gives you control over which users can see the dashboards in that folder. You can then give standard users permissions to then create or edit dashboards in that team folder, which goes back to what I mentioned on the other slide. Nice simple feature. I'll just take you in for a quick demo, and we'll jump into Dashboard Server and show you the team folders feature. So this is Dashboard Server. Once it's deployed, this is what you'll see on the Getting Started page. Now, if I wanted to add in a new folder at the top here, so this is our main menu here with our folders and dashboards that we can access here. We can create a new dashboard, but we can also create a new folder. Now, typically what a folder is once you've created it is just a standard way of grouping dashboards. It's not currently a team folder. It's just a way to sort of separate your dashboards out into a neat hierarchy there. Now, what I can do from here is I can actually edit the permissions and convert this into a Teams folder from here. But you can also, if you're an admin, you've got access to the system menu. So I can actually go in here and create team folders. You'll see that along this ribbon here, these different options. Under the team folders section, we can create a team folders from here. And that'll take us into the configuration for that team folder. But as I mentioned, you can actually convert an existing folder. So this sort of new folder that's sitting up here, I can go into the permissions section and I can convert it into a team folder. This can't be undone. So once you've turned it into a team folder, it's permanently a team folder until you delete it. So once I've converted it, I can give the folder a name anyway, like test this for now. I'm going to delete this in a minute. But we can then set permissions on this. So for instance, by default, we're seeing here that this folder anyone can view. We could actually set everyone to no access, for instance, so then only our admins or any users that we add to this team folder have permissions to see the dashboards. And we can use a username or a group and add those into here. And then we can give them these different role types. So you've got the standard view. So that'll just mean that they'll be able to view the dashboards within that folder. You can then give those users author rights, so they can publish and edit dashboards within that folder, or even give them ownership rights over the folder itself, where they can edit the permissions, rename it, or even delete the folder. Typically, you probably use the author or view options here. But that could be any sort of standard user then. So that gives those standard users the ability to then edit and publish dashboards in their own folder. And so you could sort of create different folders for different teams up here using team folders, which is great. I'm going to delete that folder for now because I don't need this here. And just go back to the slides, and we'll just move on to sort of talk about the integrations. So integrations, I'm going to talk about a few of those different tile types we listed earlier, just to highlight a few of those. One of those is the Web API tile. Any of our current customers that have been using SquaredUp for Azure or SquaredUp for SCOM, the Connect and EAM editions will hopefully be familiar with this tile. And the Web API tile is available in Dashboard Server as well. So it can utilize any API that returns JSON, ideally REST APIs. And Tile, you've got the providers can sort of connect to those services using different auth methods. So we've got a simple, a basic, and an OAuth option. Now, typically when you're working with APIs, your first steps to look at the API documentation, or even speak to any expert you might have with you that for a particular entity you're trying to integrate with. And typically you want to just understand what auth methods are supported for that tool. And also, can you query for the data you need? And you will have to sort of note that auth and query syntax will vary between vendors, but you can get all that information from that documentation or your experts, and you hopefully will be able to understand whether it will fit with some of the auth providers we provide. And typically they will all use a version of these, so you can get the majority of your tools and data into SquaredUp. As I mentioned, with Web APIs, you can add providers. So before you actually can use a Web API tile with an API, you may need to add a provider. I say may need to because there is a sort of out-of-the-box generic provider, which is basically doesn't have any sort of authentication settings at all. So if you're sort of testing with an open API endpoint that doesn't have any authentication, you can select that option. But whenever you're scoping a web API tile, you will have to use the drop-down to select a provider. You don't necessarily have to set up a provider for it. But if you're typically with most of the tools you're using out there will have some kind of authentication, so you'd be wanting to set up a provider for those. Now, those API providers can only be created by SquaredUp administrators, but once those providers are configured, they can be used across multiple tiles. You can use them, create them once and use them again across multiple tiles. We've also got the ServiceNow Tile, which allows you to sort of display instance or change requests from your ServiceNow instance with really easy sort of pickers, nice and easy to set up. And you can utilize different views and filters from ServiceNow as well. So it's easier to configure these dedicated tiles than the Web API tile, but you could use the Web API tile if you had to query other tables in ServiceNow beyond the instance or change requests, for instance. You've also got ElasticSearch Tile now, which allows you to easily visualize data from your ElasticSearch instances. Really convenient way to access ElasticSearch indices and enter those search queries. And it can utilize either Lucene or query DSL syntax. And you've also got access to sort of query templates that you can actually bring in to SquaredUp as well. You've also got the dedicated Splunk Tile. So again, easily visualize data from your Splunk instance. Really convenient way to get that Splunk data and enter your SPL queries, your search processing language queries. And again, you can also import save search queries from your Splunk instance with this tile as well. And we'll show some examples of that during the demo today. And lastly, I wanted to look at the PowerShell tile. So really powerful option now in terms of getting at the data in your environment. It gives you loads of different options. So, I mean, you could create a PowerShell script that, for instance, could retrieve and combine data from different data sources, such as different APIs. You could access and visualize data from locally stored files, CSV, text files, for instance, and also access those kind of databases that are non-SQL databases, for instance. You know, you've got lots of opportunities to pull into sources from absolutely everywhere. And really ideal when that Web API or SQL tile is not sufficient for your requirements. And if you are a heavy PowerShell user, it might be your default tile. But a great, powerful option and lots of options to get the data you need into your dashboards. So with PowerShell Tile, you can set up PowerShell profiles, and these are created once and then can be reused in PowerShell tiles. Really ideal for storing sort of reusable portions of the script, such as connection information or loading external modules. And in these, you can safely store scripts that contain any sort of credentials or authentication tokens, etc. And so powerful PowerShell profile scripts are encrypted and only can be seen by the administrators within SquaredUp. Lastly, I just actually want to look at the status tiles as well. So we've now got status tiles available for Web API, ElasticSearch, Splunk, SQL, PowerShell, and Azure Log Analytics tiles. It allows you to map status fields from your data source, for instance, or combine multiple values from data sources and add your own custom calculations to generate your own statuses, for instance, there. And we've got sort of icons and block visualizations available for those. Typically with the Web API, ElasticSearch, and Splunk tiles, you have a data mapping section when you're scoping the tile. For the SQL, PowerShell, and Azure Log Analytics options, those tiles, you just need to ensure that the query returns the correct columns and values. So I'm just going to jump back over to the environment and show you where you can set those providers up and the PowerShell profiles. So again, we're going to go into our system menu. And we can see that along from the team folders, we have this integrations and PowerShell section. So any current SquaredUp customers out there, this is essentially what we've updated from the Web API section originally. And we can go into integrations, and you see that we've created a number of our own here within our environment, but you'll see underneath here the different integration types that are available to us. So we can set up connections into our Log Analytics workspaces, for instance. Give it the workspace ID, Azure AD IDs, and we can sort of set up our Log Analytics workspace connections there. Give it a name, just gives it the identifier when you come to the drop-down when you're configuring the tile. We've got obviously the dedicated tiles now as well, nice and simple to be able to sort of enter the data, details you need. to connect to these sources. So ServiceNow is an OAuth product, uses OAuth connections for their APIs. And you've got the different sort of options here, such as the client ID, client secret, username, password, instance URL. Again, the name is just the identifier that you can select in the drop-down when you're configuring a tile. And we've got the dedicated tiles for Elasticsearch and Splunk here. So nice and simple, entering your URL, username, and passwords. Similarly for the Splunk Tile. You'll see at the bottom here, this is ignore valid SSL. So if you've got any sort of self-signed certificates for any sort of APIs you're connecting to, you can enable that to sort of ignore any invalid SSL messages there if you need to. But lastly, you've also got the Web API tile. So this gives you the different options I mentioned. So you've got the simple option, and this is ideal for those sort of endpoints that are unauthenticated, for instance, but you can also add default headers here. So you could add username and passwords or API keys here if you needed to, depending on what's required for your API. But again, the service name, you can add a base URL as well, which just means you don't have to keep entering it multiple times. And also, when you come to actually scoping the tile, you can add the extra extensions on the end of these API URLs. You can just put in the base, but you could also add those extensions in here if it's a tile you're going to be, an endpoint you're going to be hitting more regularly. Basic auth. Again, we can sort of enter the name of the provider and the URL and the username and password, which will be base64 encoded. And we can add any default headers that we need to here as well, depending on what options or requirements for your APIs. Lastly, we have got the OAuth section. So a number of tools we will be using OAuth as their providers, as their authentication methods, and you've got all the options you might need for connecting to those OAuth sources as well. So you can sort of set the different grant types that you might need, and you'll see that you have the different fields that you need to populate with that information available. So token URLs, client IDs and secrets, etc. So there's a very strong chance that the majority of tools that you've got out there, you'll be able to bring that data into a SquaredUp dashboard. And you see that we've got a number of providers we've already set up here. We've got our default sort of setups for Elasticsearch, as well as I've actually created for this example here, I've created a web API connection to our Splunk instance with a web API provider, as well as a default Splunk instance. And you'll see that very similar in those configurations. The real power comes in when you're scoping those tiles. The Splunk tile makes things a lot easier. And again, we've got our ServiceNow Tile set up as well as connections into a log analytics workspace here as well. So lots of nice options to be able to sort of integrate with those different tools that you might have out there. Next, let's take a look at our PowerShell profiles. So this is the PowerShell section where you can set up your profiles. Now, we've got a few that we've set up here. This one at the top here is the default. So default profile that will be selected if you don't select one of your custom profiles. And that doesn't have any sort of script within it. So if you're just running a straightforward script within the tile itself, it doesn't have anything that you want to obscure like credentials information, then you can just utilize that as a default. But we've got some set up here, such as this VMware PowerCLI one here. That's just the name of the profile. And you'll see in this description that's been added here, sets up a PowerShell profile and connects to a vCenter server. So nice and simple. It shows an example of its importing the module there and connecting to the vCenter, the connection information there. And that profile can then be used in our PowerShell tiles. And subsequently, we can add the additional script that we need when we're connected to that vCenter instance. We've also got another options here. We've got another one here, sort of a VMware token API one. As it says here, this profile is returning the API token in the session parameter here. Again, we're importing a module, but we're also encoding our credentials. We've got some different steps here as we're connecting to our vCenter. So a couple of different sort of profile examples there, but this is essentially where you can add your PowerShell profiles. And as you see, you can give it a name, which will be what its identifier within SquaredUp. And you can give it a description if you wish, and you can add your profile script there. Nice and simple. And that's all under the system menu there for the admins. So let's just head back to the slides. I just want to talk a little bit about our next and the more the bigger part of our demo today is actually looking at creating and sharing a dashboard. So what we're going to look at is our dashboard designer. So this is not familiar with Dashboard Designer. It allows you to really easily and flexibly configure and edit the layout of your dashboards. And you also have, when you create a dashboard, you've got a template, ability to choose a template. So that's sort of a pre-configured layout. And you can still edit that template after you've added it. It's just a nice starting point if you've got an idea of how you want your dashboard to look. And then if you want to share a dashboard, we've got our open access feature. So that enables you to easily share your dashboards across your organization, even to those users that don't have access, because does not require authentication, and it doesn't consume a user license either. So you can share your dashboards out to other users across your organization if you wish to. So I want to jump straight back in and actually show you creating a dashboard with our dashboard designer. So I'm going to come across to my Dashboarding 101 folder here and create a new dashboard. So I can click into the folder and you'll see that I can actually get the plus icon comes down a level, which means that I'm actually going to be adding a dashboard into this folder. The plus icon up here would have just added it to the main menu bar. By clicking plus and adding a dashboard, I then can show you the template chooser here. And you see there's a number of different sort of template options available. So you can go for some nice, very different sort of design straight from the bat if you wish to. Or if you're not quite sure how you want this laid out, you can just select the single tile option. I'm going to select this one here, this sort of two-row layout with one row with sort of 2 tiles on it, 2 columns. And just want to show you how easy it is to sort of flexibly change your dashboard layout. So you can add columns to the right or left of any row here, as you can see. We can add rows above and below any of these existing rows. So I can add it one below, I can add it between, or even above. I can also split tiles. If I'm looking at this main tile up here, I can actually choose to split this tile into 2. I can then adjust the layout of this, and you'll see the little dotted lines appear here that just allows you to sort of align things a bit better, but you can drop it between. They're just sort of markers to help you get things aligned. And you'll see I can split the tiles down here into smaller tiles. And again, I can sort of adjust the size of this, so I can even move it into 3 equal columns, for instance. The other thing you can do is, because they are, you can sort of add tiles on the row level, I can sort of add another row in here of tiles. Allows me to sort of have this single tile here and start to add new columns to this row here. I can also add tiles below existing tiles in this row. So I could add a tile below this one. I could split this tile and add individual tile, a full tile underneath this, or even individual tiles under the single tiles here. So you've got a lot of flexibility about how you want to lay this out. And even if you haven't got it quite right as you're sort of configuring your tiles and trying to get your layout how you want it, you can still drag and drop. You'll see this icon appear here. We can drag and drop tiles to other locations, and you'll see that tiles will fill out the space that's there. As I sort of remove tiles here, you'll see that it will automatically fill in to the space that's available. So really powerful and flexible designer. Makes things really easy to sort of get the layout that you want. But let's actually look at adding some of the tiles that we're looking at during the slides. First of all, I want to actually show you an example of one of the new status tiles. With this example, I'm actually going to use one of our sample APIs from my API Explorer. So if I can hit configure tile over here, you can see the different tile options I've got available here. And in this case, I want to select my web API tile. You see this little orange plus icon appear. That means there's more visualizations underneath. And you see there's a number of visualization options here for the web API tile. The one I'm interested in is actually one of the status tiles. And so we've got the blocks and icons option. In this case, I'm going to choose the icons option. Now, for this API, I haven't actually set up a provider. It's actually an endpoint that doesn't require authentication. So I'm actually going to use the generic provider here. So if I click next, I can then use the get or post options. So typically, if you're just trying to sort of read information, it'll just be a get for most APIs. But in this case, that's the case for this API. And I'm actually going to add in our URL here, utilize the get method, and query for that data. So this sample API, just to show you, is available. We've been using our sample API. Our site provides a lot of really neat APIs in which to sort of get used to sort of testing out those different API options. And that's available over here on our sample API site. And one of the options we used here was our status API example. Lots of different options under there to sort of get you sort of used to using the web API tile. So this is nice. If I wanted to, I can add some headers or data to the query string, depending on what your API requires. The options are there to be able to add those. In this case, I can actually add a particular property for this, because you'll see it's returned quite a lot of objects here. And for this example, I just want to sort of limit this down. There's actually a property called data points for this API. And I can set this to 10 and apply those changes, and we'll see that it's only returning the 10 options there. If I click on response data, the great thing with the web API tiles, it actually shows you the response data that's come back. So in this case, all this data is actually relevant. This is this section of data here is what we need. So we don't actually have to sort of put a key path property in here. And what this allows you to do is then actually, if you've got something that's sitting in an array of information further down the hierarchy of the response data, you can then filter into that, as you can see here. For example, you can sort of drill down into that to focus in on that information. So that's what's being utilized when we're starting to map data, for instance. But in this case, I'm actually going to use all of that, that response. I can then set the state property. So in this case, I've got this status property that comes back from this API, and I'm actually going to use that to map to our health states here. And we've got these sort of healthy, warning, and critical health states that you typically use. And we can add further states if we want to, further healthy and warning and critical states as well if we wanted to. But in this case, with this API, it works perfect. If we've got the response data here, we've got status of healthy, critical, and warning, which matches nicely with the data mapping. Doesn't have to. It could be a number that's been returned there. But with this sort of sample API, I can actually, it returns actual these fields here of warning, healthy, and critical. And as soon as I've mapped those in there, we can see that the health states have been updated on the icons. If I click next here, and then next again, I'll come to the sorting. Well, I mean, we can sort by health state if we wanted to, or the label. I can group by health state as well if we wanted to split these out. But I'm quite happy with the default option here. If I click next, I can then set the labels. This is not the label I want to be using for this one, so I'm actually going to change this to this label here. It's actually the name of this sample service here. I can also add a sub-label as well. So here I can set the sub-label of the actual name of the site as well. I'm going to click done there and add a title. I'm just going to call this status for now. With the status tiles, we can actually edit the format of this, so I can change it to sort of like a row sort of view, or just an icon view here as well. I quite like this row view, so I'm going to keep it like that. Next, what I want to show you is actually a status tile using the PowerShell tile. As I mentioned in the slides, it doesn't have a data mapping section. You have to make sure that that data is returned in those sort of required columns and values. So if I select the PowerShell tile option, you'll see that we've got these different status blocks here, the icons and bars. Block, sorry, and I'm going to use the block visualization for this. In this case, I'm actually going to use one of the VMware PowerShell profiles we set up. And so in this way, I can click on the script, and I can paste in my script here. And you can see what this is doing here is exactly what the tile requires. So creating a column named state, which must exist to contain the following values of healthy, critical, and warning. So we're then setting that property to that state. And then we're doing a loop through these to actually map this sort of anything that says powered on to healthy, anything that's powered off to critical, and anything else will come through and show as warning. And we'll see if I apply that those blocks will come through. So nice and powerful option to get health state information from different sources, and then provide that in your dashboard. So the PowerShell Tile is a very powerful option. And we can see the response data. So you can see the powered on, powered off, and also the count of these. And these are the things that we want to display on our labels as well. So I can actually sort and group if I wanted to, but in this case, it's only the two options. So I'm quite happy to keep those as it is. I actually want to reduce this down to 2 columns. This is only 2 blocks available. I could adjust the height and font size, but as I haven't got any labels yet, I'll keep won't adjust that as yet. So we should be able to use the mustache picker to see the properties that are available. In this case, I actually want to show the property name here, powered off and powered on. And I can also add a sub-label as well, using one of the properties that's been returned. In this case, I'm going to use the count option here. It's a bit small on this screen, so I can come back to the blocks and increase the size of the font. So now we've got our VM power status data returned from a PowerShell script from our VMware VMs. Now I might want to use the Splunk tile to actually bring in some Splunk log information. So I'm going to use the dedicated Splunk tile for this. With the Splunk tile, I haven't got all the visualizations as yet, but there are more coming to sort of match in, as you've seen with the Web API tile. I'm going to click the line graph in this case. You'll see that my Splunk dedicated provider is already selected. And here I can actually just enter my search query for Splunk. So I can enter my search query into this box here, or I could actually load a query in if I wanted to from my Splunk instance, as I mentioned. You'll see that it's loaded that query in. You can see that's updated the chart there. But in this case, I actually want to use my own sort of query here. We can also set the time frame as well, so a specific time frame, so we can set it to the last month, for instance. But we can also set it to use page time frame as well. So if I select use page time frame, if I just come out of the edit mode for a minute, this time picker up here, I can edit this to 7 days, for instance, and I'll Splunk data update for the last 7 days. So I can come back into the edit. For now, I actually want this to be specific time frame for the last 24 hours. I'm happy with that. I'm happy with the data range fit to data from 0. I can also adjust the height as well as remove the legend. But in this case, I quite like having the legend there because I can actually see what the different lines refer to. Now, it's actually coloring these based on the label by default. So you'll see that when I hit custom and it removes that label, they all sort of turn to the same color. So I'm going to use the mustache picker to actually pick the display name again, or I could have used the host. But the cool thing you can do here is I can also, actually for what I might do is actually use the host property here. What I can actually do is add some script here. I can add the split script in here, and I can actually remove the domain name from here. So I could actually split on the dot in the domain name, and then I can choose out of that array the first entry, which will be represented by 0, and I can actually just have the host names there. So you can do some nice stuff with custom labels as well. So I'm just going to call this host events. So we've now got data from our Splunk instance on there as well. Lastly, I actually want to add a couple of donut tiles here. I'm going to look at my ElasticSearch instance for instance. So I've got ElasticSearch tile. In this case, I've got a number of different visualizations again. I'm going to use the donut tile. I've already got just one Elasticsearch provider available, so that's selected here by default. And here we can actually select our indexes from Elasticsearch. I'm going to use this data logs index here, which has got some web traffic sample data in it. I could add other indices here. And you see the different search tiles as I mentioned earlier. We can use Lucene queries or query DSL. So for instance, if there was sort of a property that I could search on, I don't know, something, I think there's a property called tags and showing login, I can add that query in here. We could load queries in as well if we wanted to, if we had some. And you'll see that you get the response data. So the actual data I might want to show here is a number of logins by OS. So if I look down in this information, I can see the data I want is actually here under this hits array here, which is sitting under this hits section here. So I can actually need to use the key path here to then come focus in on that data. Because we've got quite a few different bits brought back in this response, I can quite simply hits will take me to that information in this array here, and then I can map to that data. quite simply. In this case, I'm actually going to use the count aggregation, and I can group that on that OS property, and I can just group that together into a donut tile here. So really nice and simple to get at your Elasticsearch data. But what I want to actually show is visitors by OS from this data. And I'm going to use a DSL query for that. So I can just take my query, place that into my search box here. And then we'll see the response data is slightly different here, actually. The data I'm actually after is not under hits. It's actually under this aggregation section here. And it's actually under this bucket section here. We can see that it returns an OS and a count. That's the information I want. So I can quite simply down to that buckets section. Then I'll be able to map to that particular property. In this case, it actually returns a count. So I actually count property. So I'm actually going to group by the key, which is this OS property that's returned, and then a dot count. And then I've got my donut there showing my visitors by OS. I can also change the color of this as well. We've got some different color options for the donut. I'm quite happy with the general palette here. So I'm just going to call that visitors by OS. And I could also, if I wanted to, add in my ServiceNow tile as well to show some instances here. So I'm going to select my ServiceNow. I'm going to show the donut tile. It's already selected my ServiceNow provider. I can quite easily select instance from here. I can even add a ServiceNow filter to show just unassigned, for instance. And I click done. And now I've got my incidents unassigned, if I can type. So there you go. If I give this dashboard a name, at the moment it's in draft mode, you can see by the italics. But as soon as I hit publish, that'll be available for my users, or I could even place it into a team folder, for instance, and limit its visibility. And I've got my dashboard there. If I wanted to share this out beyond dashboard server to users that can't log in, I can then go to the share option, select open access and enable that. You'll see it will generate that preview of that open access dashboard. You can set options like full screen in embed, sort of remove some of the menu and title options. And you just get this obfuscated URL then that's unauthenticated and doesn't really take up a license. And if I click open access preview button up here, you'll see that it's still a dashboard that you can hover over the different elements. But it's you can then share that out to different users onto wall screens maybe, or embed it into your own intranet portal. So I've done some different things, like I've created my own dashboard here called SquaredUp, for instance. So here I'm using our web content tile to embed a preview of our website. I'm returning response time metrics from Pingdom here with the web API tile. I'm bringing some host stats through from our VM from using PowerShell. And you see those donuts again showing from Elasticsearch and ServiceNow data. I've also done some fun things with the API status tile here, where I've actually sort of shown the weather, the current weather in our different offices around the globe. And this is quite simple. I'm actually using the generic endpoint because I'm just hitting the Open Weather Map API here. You can add in a queue option to sort of set the location and the API keys as well. And this will show some response data here. And you'll see that what I'm focusing on here is this weather data, because this is the data I'm interested in. So I've added the weather key path. And then what I've done is I've used the main property, which is the main sort of weather returned. And I've mapped that to different sort of health states here. So when it's clear and cloudy, it's healthy. If it's drizzle and rain, we get a warning, and critical is thunderstorms. So you see, it's not just sort of operation, sort of IT data you can pull into here. You can create dashboards for practically anything here. And now this tile's just showing the weather and even sort of like the sub of that weather. So we can see it's raining here. And I'm looking out my window now, and yep, it's right. It is raining. But you can create dashboards for anyone. You know, you could create something maybe for your sales and business teams to look at. You could sort of show the current finances, sort of the sales data here. See, we've got things like a deal timeline and value by currency, by source. We've got some different sort of data we're returning here. So we can create a nice dashboard for our sales teams or our finance teams. You could create one for your service desk teams. You could even create, so here we can see showing sort of support cases and instance or satisfaction scores all in one dashboard. We could create one for our apps team. Show sort of the health of our apps as well as our web front ends. We can see sort of response time metrics, so CPU and memory and disk. But you can create all sorts of dashboards with Dashboard Server. So we could even create a security dashboard for our security teams and bring in those sources. With those sort of different tile options that we have, there's lots of different options to bring that data into SquaredUp. What we try and help you out when you first deploy Dashboard Server, we actually have a getting started page that's sort of really nice to get to help ease you into using Dashboard Server. You can then edit this dashboard and actually look at these sort of different tiles options. We've got examples of the status tile here, and you can sort of look into these and see how they're configured to get an idea of how to utilize the Web API tile, for instance. An example of the PowerShell tile here as well. And you can sort of work your way through sort of looking at some different sort of tile types. And then you can sort of look at the next steps. Well, this will have sort of links out to our KB. So our knowledge base has lots of articles on how to use the different tiles and sort of talks about the different features, such as team folders and open access. And you've got sort of different access to not only our knowledge base, but even sort of our YouTube channels as well. And you'll see that we've got a link out to our Community Answers platform as well, where you can get support for the free edition of Dashboard Server. So that's all I've got time really to show you today. I hope that was a nice sort of introduction into sort of Dashboard Server. But as I've said, the dashboard design and those integration tiles really relevant for all the SquaredUp products as well. So hopefully that was useful. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the day and the other sessions that are coming up.